Hi, welcome back. Got another security stories for you. This one, probably the craziest of all, actually ended up with me in Crown Court looking at several years of prison sentence if things had gone badly wrong there. So it was pretty serious. It wasn't something that I had expected to happen at all. So I'll take you through it, and I'll take you through all of the knowledge. You know, a lot of these things I wasn't directly involved with, but because of the court case I then learnt about what had happened. So I'll take you through the whole thing as best as I can. The story begins, I was down the gym, training as usual. I was well known in the area for doing security work. I had a pretty good reputation as a solid guy that had done some decent work. I had a lot of respect from locals, you know, people that were supposed to be super tough dudes and gang members and whatever. You know, they respected my kind of integrity on the door. I wouldn't bend the rules too much for them, but at the same time I treated them all like decent human beings. We would have a chat and sort things out. You know, I wasn't particularly rude to any of them. Sometimes when things went wrong I would defend myself, as I mentioned in previous videos, and they were pretty reasonable about that. You know, this was back in the day where there was some levels of integrity among the kind of criminal population. If you handled yourself well and you were a kind of stoic stand-up guy, even if you weren't particularly on their side, they had a level of respect for you. And generally speaking, you know, you'd see these guys in the gym, or I'd be doing a bit of boxing or something like that, they would be there as well, and they had a kind of begrudging respect for me, and we all got on with each other. So I was fairly well known, and I was training. I was lifting pretty heavy and respectable weights, and a guy came up to me in the gym I'd not met before, and I've spoken about this guy before. I'd ended up doing a bit of work with him, and he was an absolute monster. He was a really big guy. He was about 6'5", really well built, very muscular. He looked like he could kind of eat dudes for breakfast. He had that kind of look about him. He was a really tough guy, but actually a very pleasant guy to speak to. We got on really well. He was very intelligent, very articulate, a very nice guy to speak to, very interesting to talk to as well. He had had quite a colourful life. He asked my services doing a bit of security. It wasn't the normal stuff. He was looking to have a building protected. He had bought an industrial unit and he wanted to turn it into some sort of business affair that he said he wanted, you know, protection on there. He didn't want people breaking in. And so I procured some razor wire and some various different bits for him, fitted them up, got all that sorted out. I didn't really care much what the building was for, to be frank, and I left him to that. Several weeks later, there's a bit of chatter going on down the gym, and someone says to me, "Hey, did you hear about that Cannabis cafe that opened up?" And I was like, "No, I haven't heard about that." And bear in mind, I'll sort of take you back in time a little bit. This was about mid-2000s, I guess 2005-ish, something around there, 2006. And at the time, the UK government had reclassified cannabis in the UK. They had taken it from a Class B drug, which had quite strict prison sentences attached to it and was taken quite seriously, down to a Class C drug, which in effect really made it kind of semi-legal. Like, the police were making statements on the news saying, we're not going to be chasing people down for using cannabis in the UK. You know, what they do behind closed doors is their own business, kind of thing. So the general feeling of people was that it had been decriminalised, so to speak. And some of the police forces even went as far as to say they will never prosecute anyone for cannabis offences, as people were feeling pretty good about that. And it was kind of viewed as that probably was the doorway for complete legalisation, and a lot of European countries have gone that way now. Anyway, I digress, but I'm just trying to sow the seeds as to kind of the background to this situation. So it turned out that someone in the local area had indeed opened up a cannabis cafe. I hadn't really heard that much about it until these guys started chatting to me in the gym, and when they told me where it was, it struck me that, hey, that's probably in a very similar place to the security work that I had done on this building. Then I started putting two and two together, obviously, and thought maybe it's the same building. So Again, I didn't think that much about it. I did approach my solicitor at the time and I just said to him, look, what's the situation here? You know, I've done some security work for someone. They've paid me to fix some razor wire up and a few other bits and pieces, kind of strengthen up some bits of the building or whatever. And, you know, I'm a bit concerned because I think that that building may now be used for some sort of illegal activity. And he said, look, you know, you haven't got an issue. You're quite in your rights to do security work for someone. It's not your job to do some sort of private investigation into all their business affairs. As far as you're concerned, you're a self-employed guy. You've taken on some security work. You fulfilled what you did. You haven't broken the law in anything you've done, and just crack on and forget about it. So I didn't think much more of it. I then get a call from this guy that I've done the work for, and he says, look, I need to have a word with you, you know, can you come down? And I said, yeah, sure, I'll come down and have a chat to you. And I've got to admit, I was kind of curious as to what was going on. I wanted to know, was this actually the building that everyone was talking about, you know, or had he got a completely legitimate place and I had misunderstood what was going on? So I went down there, and sure enough, it was kind of like a bit of a youth club vibe. You know, there was people in there chilling out on seats, playing cards, playing chess. There was like a little snack bar in there, and it was generally a pretty relaxed place, music playing, but sure enough, people were smoking in there. And it was also at the time when I think the indoor smoking ban had just come in as well in the UK. Although they had taken the cannabis legislation down from Class B to C, they'd also said no one should be smoking anything in a closed commercial building. So there was kind of two ways of looking at this place, I guess. Anyway, I go and meet the guy in there, and it was pretty funny. You know, I saw the stuff that I'd put up on the building, and sure enough, you know, they had a few extra security measures there as well. There was like an airlock door. The door system itself was quite ingenious. You basically had these two doors that were like yay thick that led you into the building. You went through the first door, and just to put into context how clever these doors were, they were multi-layered doors. So you had like a layer of wood on the outside, but the wood was also studded with metal. So if you used cutters on the outer wood, you would also hit metal. So you kind of got a wooden or a metal blade. You know, you're going to struggle to cut through both, but let's say you use a metal blade and still get through the wood, it might take you a bit longer. Once you've gotten through that, they actually had a layer of tar on the other side of that, and they had that to bind up anyone that was cutting through with a disc cutter or whatever. So the idea being the tar would kind of coat the blade and make it blunt very quickly and not very effective. After that, they actually had another layer of wood, and then between these two layers of wood, they had a set of metal rollers running all the way down the door internally. So again, the idea being that if you used cutting equipment on this door, that it would just spin the rollers. So even if you managed to get through the two sections and the tar and all that kind of thing, you might end up hitting these rollers, and then any spinning blade would just spin these rollers around and it would be ineffective again. After that, I think you had another layer of steel, like a hardened steel sheet, and then after that, another layer of wood. So that this door was like a giant sandwich of kind of different problems for a blade to get to. And you might think, well, people would use a cutting torch to get in. Yes, but don't forget the door had like wood on either side and wood in the middle as well. So that would actually cause the whole building to catch on fire. So that wouldn't be a viable way for people to enter the building unless they simply wanted to burn the whole place down. Anyway, I get through this first door, and there's a CCTV monitoring the door outside. Get in, and it's like an airlock situation. So that door then closes behind me. There's like a guy running the door there. He shuts the door behind me. Then he knocks on the inner door, and the inner door is about the same thickness with pretty much the same kind of makeup. They then open that, and you go into this cafe place. So it's very, very well secured. I walk in, I see the guy over at the counter that I want to talk to. And again, he was absolutely huge. He was messing about playing some games over there. I think at the time he was playing a game whereby you held a sledgehammer out at arm's length and you had to like lean the hammer back and make it touch your nose and then bring it back out again. And he was offering people like £5-10 notes or whatever if they could manage to do this feat. And the idea being obviously that you didn't smack yourself in the face with it, but it's very difficult if you have to straighten your arm and you can only use wrist strength. And it was a pretty sizable size head on that hammer, so that was the kind of thing. He was a pretty good laugh, this guy. He was always doing like grip strength tests and stuff. I mean, to put into context his physical strength, he was freakishly strong. He weighed about 100 kilos. He was benching 230 kilos raw when I last saw him at the gym, and that wasn't even his best bench, but a 230 kilo bench raw at 100 kilos is a really, really good weight. You know, he wasn't on gear or anything like that. He wasn't like a huge jacked bodybuilder. He was just freakishly strong. He actually had, his parents were both quite gifted athletes. His mother had been in the Commonwealth Games for shot put, and his father she had met during her time doing these sort of high level athletics. He was a little smaller than the mother, but strength to weight ratio he had was absolutely huge. So I'm guessing these two people that were very gifted genetically and good athletes, when they had a child, you know, it just had all the right stuff going on. So most people would have looked at this guy and assumed that he was on something, or, you know, he looked like he had been dosing himself with growth hormone for about 10 years, but actually I know for a fact he was completely clean. He was just a genetic freak. And he was just talking in general about the security, and he said, you know, we think we're going to have some problems down there. And I said, oh, well, obviously I'm guessing, you know, the police are probably taking an interest. And he said, yeah, for sure, you know, that they've come down once already. And what had previously happened, that the police had gone there and pretty much tried to raid the place. They'd looked at the schematics of this industrial building, and it was like a single story industrial unit. It had this airlock system, one door in, one door out. But if you looked at the schematics of it from the original plan, it actually had a set of like double patio doors at the front. These had been bricked up. So they looked at that and thought, right, there's going to be a single skin brick wall there. So instead of attacking the airlock door system, which of course has been strengthened and has got stills and all that around it, the building did have windows, but they had been secured on the inside. Bars had been fitted, and those bars were no joke. They were pretty thick steel bars on the inside of the windows. They were actually pinned into the walls of the building with big heavy bolts, so you would never have got those bars out. You could have, I guess, smashed the windows and slowly cut through the bars. That would have been your only option there. So this particular time, he told me, the police had then attacked this area where they felt that there was a single skin brick wall, and that had actually been strengthened up. Part of the process of securing this building right at the beginning was the fact that there was this single skin brick wall there. So actually that was built out slightly on the inside with the frame, and it was filled with concrete and some iron rods in there. So it was reinforced concrete, and it was about 3 times thicker than any other parts of the wall. That happened to be the part of the building the police attacked, and of course the attack was pretty fruitless. From the pictures and the video I saw, they attacked it with sledgehammers and one of those red key battering ram type things, and just smacking that against the wall. It took them about half an hour, and I think they made a hole about yay big in the wall. So they weren't very impressed with that, and in the end someone just opened the door and let them straight into the place. So the police had gone in there, they'd found nothing, but they had noticed that just before they went into the place, there was quite a lot of smoke coming out of a chimney on the sort of upper part of the building. They found a mezzanine in there which had a stove and some pure oxygen feeding to the stove, and then that stove vented out a chimney through the roof. So they guessed that whatever had been in the building may have disappeared into that stove. Pure oxygen was added, which will pretty much burn up anything that you can think of, and then of course it just turned to smoke and disappeared. So evidence gone. And the police were pretty peed off about this, understandably. So he said, you know, we're a bit concerned that they might come back and they might bring some heavy equipment, etc. And I just wanted to pick your brains on the security side of things. And I said, look, you know, it's actually Not the most comfortable thing for me to be involved in now. I've got some pretty straight contracts and stuff that I need to be doing. I can't really be heavily involved in this. And he said, well, actually, we've got an inkling that the police are coming today. And I thought, oh no, you know, this does not sound good. And he said, yeah, we've got an idea, you know, we've been sort of heads up that that's a possibility. And then a couple of minutes later, we hear a shout at the door, and they said, oh, there's someone coming down the driveway. So we have a look at the video feed, and there's a whole load of vehicles coming down the driveway. So we've got like a tractor coming down the driveway, flanked by police officers. Then there's like 10 different police vehicles, you know, a mobile police station, quite a lot of police officers, maybe 30 plus police officers with this thing, a couple of different vehicles that look like they've got a sort of heavy mob of police in there. Now I'm kind of trapped in this building, so I'm saying to the guy, well, I better leave. And he said, look, no one can leave. You know, the police are literally outside, and there's one way in and one way out. So everyone's got to stay in now. And we're just waiting to see what happens. And then we see the windows get smashed at the end of the building. And like I said, they had these huge bars in the windows themselves. Chains got put around the bars, and then we realise, you know, looking at the CCTV, the plan of the police at this point is to hook this up to this tractor that they've got. And it wasn't a police tractor, it looked like they'd borrowed it from a farmer. You know, I don't think the police have their own tractors, but somehow they'd got hold of this thing. Maybe it was the local councils or whatever, they had asked to use it. They'd hooked these heavy duty chains up, and then they just went backwards with the tractor. I guess they thought that they would just pop all the bars out from the window, leaving like a really big aperture which they could then jump through and raid the place pretty rapidly, because obviously they wanted to get in there before anything happened with the evidence that they were looking for. So they reversed the tractor rather rapidly. I've got video, I'm sure you're watching it right now. It's a bit hazy, the video, because it was off a very old YouTube article that I found that I was able to kind of pull back up. And they actually pulled the entire end wall of the building off. Like, the building literally started to fall down. There was dust and rubble everywhere. People had sort of fallen over. People were having asthma attacks and choking. Because don't forget, most of the people in this place, this wasn't like a bunch of hardened gang members. This was mainly like a bunch of hippie-ish customers that were in there just chilling out, sitting on massage chairs or whatever. And they were not expecting the entire wall to get pulled off the end of the building, because it was a pretty reasonable size unit, you know. So you imagine that's quite a lot of rubble coming down. And then over this rubble comes these guys dressed like pretty much stormtroopers. They were like the most overdressed police officers I've seen to raid a cafe, basically, where the police had already announced, you know, that they weren't bothered about this kind of thing. It was a Class C drug. They didn't really care about it. Everyone was free to do what they wanted behind closed doors. So it was somewhat surprising that they had then spent God knows how many tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds on this ridiculous raid. I'm guessing that what they wanted to do was get in the first place with a fairly simple raid. When that was ineffective and they kind of got made to look a bit silly because they were unable to get through the wall and they were unable to recover any evidence, that was a big like egg on the face for them. So then they decided to come back with a little bit more force, and this had backfired as well, because now they had ripped an entire wall down. And because they'd ripped this entire wall down, it actually took a few minutes for any of the police to enter the building, because there was falling rubble, there was a danger to life, you know, there was people rolling around in, you know, having asthma attacks and stuff. So they couldn't just suddenly all run in there. During this time, of course, smoke starts to appear from this chimney in the building again. So clearly someone was upstairs in this room firing up the stove with the oxygen cylinders attached. And once again, they were unable to collect any evidence. But, you know, when they burst in there, I couldn't believe the sort of gear they had on. This was the sort of thing I'd expect to see the police wearing, like in a SWAT program in the US, where they're raiding some kind of armed gang or whatever. It was crazy. These guys came in, they've got like balaclavas on, they've got blacked out Oakley masks on, you know, they're screaming and shouting for us all to get on the floor. I was pretty annoyed at that point because, you know, I'd found the police to be fairly ineffective, and also fairly unpleasant to me while I was doing security work in general. And they had treated a lot of my colleagues in pretty crappy ways. They hadn't been very useful when it came to dealing with serious situations that we had had. We all wanted, you know, the support of a good police force. It just so happened that that hadn't been our experience up until that point. And then when they finally did deliver some very competent policing, it was arguably completely overkill for the situation at hand. A few hippies smoking a bit of dope, basically. So these guys storm in, they're telling us all to get down on the floor or whatever. None of us got down on the floor, I might add. We just said, look, you know, stop all the ridiculous stuff. We're not armed, we're not doing anything wrong. Just calm down, take your masks off. You know, I don't know what you're doing with all that on, and just have a sensible chat and let's go from there. And actually, they did shout for about 2 minutes, and when they realised that the shouting was ineffective, and I guess they could have, you know, done something to us, they could have tased us or whatever, but we weren't actually doing anything aggressive. We were very calm. We were just standing there being incredibly calm. A couple of them did take their helmets and masks off and just have a conversation with us, and kind of realised that we were okay guys, you know, and we weren't anything like they thought we were going to be. It seemed that they had been briefed up that we were going to be like super aggressive, that we might be armed, all this kind of different stuff. And nothing could have been further from the truth. You know, we were just having a pleasant chat with them. In the end, I think one of them was chatting to me about gym supplementation and that he wanted to get bigger arms, and, you know, what did I recommend? And we were getting along pretty well. So, and he even said to me, this is not what we expected, you know. So they'd gone to these huge lengths to do all this stuff. Clearly the guys on the ground had been kind of misled probably by their seniors, and then they had gone all guns blazing in, and only to find that actually there's some pretty reasonable people on the other side of the wall. So after that, I found out that the police tried several other tactics to kind of close this place down, and the next one they tried was actually sealing up the entrance. They conducted another raid, which was largely unsuccessful. In the end, they were let in again. There was no evidence collected, but this time they had the bright idea that they would sit down the driveway of this place, because again it had one way in and one way out, which was this driveway that you could access. On one side of that driveway was a neighbour's house, so you couldn't get access through there, and on the other side was a train track. So after the tractor incident, I was told that the guy that ran the place had some more bright ideas. He fitted up a height restrictor on this driveway that they only had one way in and one way out, which was a driveway. On one side of the driveway you had a railway line, and on the other side of the driveway you actually had a neighbour's property, a small house, so you couldn't access it either way. And behind it was kind of this rail line situation as well. That was like privately owned railway land, so they couldn't access it that way. So one way in and out, and he fitted a height restrictor on the driveway of the property, and the height restrictor would have stopped any vehicle other than a car, I guess, going down there, because it was very low, and it was made out of girders. So it wasn't a height restrictor that you could have like run into with an industrial vehicle. It was literally made of girders about yay thick, and it had even gone so far as to put a sign on there saying no tractors and a big kind of red cross going through it. So that was clearly a bit of a dig at the police, and it wasn't allowing them to repeat the performance that they had already played out. He had then put metal poles into the ground all around the outside of this cafe, and he had put tyres over the poles. The poles were concreted into the ground. They were like scaffold poles basically. They had been set in concrete into the ground. Then he had put tyres over these poles. Then he had filled the stacks of tyres with concrete. So you now had the whole outside of the building, and about 6 foot high all the way around it were these stacks of tyres that were filled with concrete. So if the police had any ideas of going up there and trying to pull windows apart or pull parts off the building with any sort of industrial gear, unfortunately that wasn't going to happen. About the only part of the building that was now relatively accessible would have been the roof, which had been covered in anti-burglar slip paint. And also it would probably be unlikely that the police would access a building through a roof like that. They have health and safety protocols to adhere to. You know, they're not the SAS. They're not going to start, you know, fast roping through broken holes in a building roof. That's just not the way they do things. And I was told it by my solicitor, because obviously I approached him as soon as all this happened, because when I was caught up in that raid, I was arrested and taken away and questioned. I didn't think much more about it, but of course I wanted to keep myself safe, so I approached my solicitor and said, you know, this is what's happened. He advised me, yeah, you've done nothing wrong. You've gone down there to sort things out with this guy and chat to him, and clearly you were caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, so no big deal there. And my solicitor actually told me, you know, a big problem for the police would be because cannabis had been downgraded to a Class C, there was very limited powers they could use for it. You couldn't call in like special units from the military to jump through the roof of a building for a Class C. It wasn't even considered a serious offence. So an awkward situation for them to deal with, because it would be hard for them to get even significant funding, despite the fact it looked like they had spent a significant amount of money trying to get rid of this place to start with. That is always a concern. You know, even if you think you're in the right, if the authorities, no matter which country you're in, have spent significant amounts of money going down a pathway trying to eradicate you or whatever it is you're doing or standing for, it would be quite unusual for them to pause halfway through and say, you know what, we've invested all this money going down this path and we haven't been very successful, so now we're going to turn back with nothing, because their jobs are on the line or their promotions are on the line. So once they've started down that path, they're going to probably keep going at it, and they're going to go at it harder and harder until they get a result. This is often where people end up getting prosecuted and they're innocent, you know, and they end up going to prison for something they haven't even done, because the police have gone so far down an avenue, and even when they realise that maybe they're barking up the wrong tree, it's too late then. You know, they've laid their names to that, they've signed off on, you know, vast sums of money for part of that investigation. They're not likely to want to say, hey, you know what, I made a complete mistake, it wasn't this guy all along, and that's on me, and we've wasted like God knows how many tens of thousands of pounds on this. It's not human nature to admit mistakes like that. People are just going to keep heading down the wrong path and try and make it fit as best they can. So the police had an ingenious idea. They would raid this place again. They just turned up on foot, but this time what they would do, once it had been raided, and they didn't get anything, they were let in apparently. Once they got in there, you know, they did a search of the premises. Obviously everything had been burnt once again. And then they had the ingenious idea of sealing the entrance to the place off. So they then sat some police officers outside in a vehicle and they sort of monitored the place. So the idea being they've sterilised the environment now. There's obviously nothing left in there, all the evidence is gone. And if they can seal the place off and search everyone who comes in and out of that place from now on, in theory nothing should get in. However, the guy that was operating this place had other ideas about that. Someone procured a uniform worn by rail workers, and they even had like a horn and a flag and all these like accoutrements that apparently people that work on railway lines have. And the stuff was actually brought down the railway lines and then over the fence and into this place. So the police were unaware that anyone was even going in and out, and it was brought in and out by some guy dressed as a railway worker. So, you know, they were pretty astute. There was a cat and mouse game being played there. I had kind of stayed away from all this after the arrest and after talking to my solicitor. It wasn't till a couple of months later, and there were like 7 attempted busts in all of which were pretty much unsuccessful. I think in 7 raids they picked up about 1.5 grams of cannabis, which is nothing. You know, that's the kind of thing you find on the inside of a school kid's pockets, you know, if his mum's searching him or whatever. It's a tiny amount. The police were eager to get a result in this case. They ended up utilising some undercover officers to go in there, gather some evidence, and then charges were laid out to the people that they felt were involved. To my surprise, I was charged. So we were all charged with conspiracy to supply a Class C substance, and I think I had like 3 rounds of charges for that. I can't remember exactly why I was charged 3 times for it, but it was pretty much the same charge repeatedly, and that could have been about 7 years in prison. I was informed by my solicitor, so I was quite nervous about that. We had to go to Kingston Crown Court, Now, they all had technical defences because there were several people up on charges. I think there were 6 people in total, 3 of which went guilty because they had much lesser charges laid on them. Their solicitors told them if they went guilty, they would basically be let off with a kind of slap on the wrist, a community order, a fine, or whatever it was. There wouldn't be a custodial sentence involved. So that's the route they all decided to take. I, of course, went not guilty because I felt I hadn't done anything wrong, and my solicitor was compliant with that feeling as well. And then the other 2 main guys were not guilty as well. They actually felt they weren't guilty on the basis that they had not been the suppliers of the drugs in that place. They had simply provided a place. Given that it was a Class C at the time and the police were making statements that they weren't too bothered about any of this, you know, the fact that you were providing a kind of club for people to use and that dealers might go in there and might ply their trade once they're there, and you're kind of just making money out of the club side of things, that was to them a technical defence. So they very much presented themselves as, yeah, we feel, you know, we've been involved in this, we've done this, we've done that, we've secured it, and we feel that we've actually technically done nothing wrong, we haven't broken the law in any way. But they did admit to like very strong involvement in the place. And they also admitted that the police had really annoyed them, you know, taking the stance they had taken given the climate at the time. And this had led to them kind of having this cat and mouse game with the police. And I understood that because, like I said, I was pretty annoyed about that attitude as well. During the months it had taken to run up to this trial, I was quite surprised to find, if you look back in Hansard's at the time, this was around 2008, but Cannabis actually went from a Class C to a Class B, and I think it directly related to this case. So in a way I'm sort of to blame for that, in a way these other guys are sort of to blame for that. Sorry if you're someone who likes that stuff. But what it looked like was the Home Secretary was approached during the question time or whatever they do in the Houses of Parliament, and he was asked by a couple of local MPs, and the members of the police were there as well from the local area, and he was told, look, there's an organised crime group, they're flagrantly breaking the law, they're, you know, locking the police out, the police can't get into this place, everyone's laughing at the police, it's become a real social issue. The public are starting to think, hey, we can just do what we want, you know, these guys are kind of making the police look silly, so we want something to change so we can deal with this. And the Home Secretary's on record as saying, yeah, no problem, I will give you anything you need to deal with this, because we cannot have these kind of disturbances in society where people are seen to be having one over on the police. So I believe that as a direct result of those comments, within about 2 or 3 weeks, there was some talk in the news about, oh, we've actually decided that cannabis is quite bad for young people's brains, and with that in mind, we've suddenly decided to reclassify it again, and we're whacking it back to a Class B, which obviously meant that these guys would then get a lot more funding, they would be able to fight this big court case, and they could throw everything at putting these guys and myself in prison. And I was caught in the middle of all this. The trial was really serious. Kingston Court is a court which has the ability to deal with like terrorist offences and stuff. So, you know, you can have witnesses there that are hidden behind screens, they can have their voices dubbed over so they kind of come out and you can't tell who's speaking. All kinds of facilities there to deal with very high profile cases, and actually some of those facilities were surprisingly used in the case that I was involved in, and I couldn't believe this, you know, like there was undercover officers giving evidence, and the levels that they had gone to, I later found out, you know, during the disclosure, when obviously they have to give all the evidence over, it turned out I'd been followed quite often, I'd had all my mail seized for many months, and I remember actually my missus, who was a model at the time, she was saying, photographers keep sending me CDs with all my pictures on, and I'm not getting any of the pictures, you know, I don't know where they're going, and they just seem to be disappearing. And she was ringing Royal Mail up at the time and screaming her head off at Royal Mail, so I'm guessing that those CDs were being seized, and being as they were computer discs, they were probably searching all through them and then having a good old smirk and a look at all erotic looking pictures of her in lingerie or whatever, and she never got any of those back, so God knows what happened to them. But they also raided me during that time, you know, seized a load of my stuff. They took phones, they took computers. This happened when they arrested me under these new set of charges. They took all kinds of things from my house. They didn't find anything particularly of interest. They did take a bunch of vacuum sealed bags that I had in the kitchen. I actually had them for storage of vitamins and creatine for the gym, because whenever I would travel or go anywhere, I would always get these little vacuum sealed bags, and I would put some creatine in one, which did, I must admit, look really dodgy. And I still do that occasionally when I travel. You know, I put some whey protein or whatever in a seal bag and take it with me, because you can't take the whole giant tub with you. And I'd put creatine in them. I'd put multivitamins in them. Generally, I had my multivitamins for the day. So if I was working, I was on like those animal pack supplements, which were like these about 10 multivitamin tablets that were like enough to choke a horse. So I would put those in a vacuum seal bag, take them with me in my rucksack, and then I'd go off to work or whatever. So I had like, I don't know, 500 of these bags in the kitchen that I'd bought from the shop. Didn't think much of it. That was literally the only piece of evidence they had against me in court. You know, I ran out of times that the guy held this evidence thing up when he was questioning me, saying, you know, can you tell us about these? And funnily enough, yeah, I could tell him exactly where they came from. He then started quizzing me about bodybuilding and supplements. I blew them away with all my discussions about bodybuilding supplements in the courtroom, so they couldn't really argue with me. It was clear why I had those things. It was clear exactly what I was doing. I completely admitted to why I'd gone down to this place in the first place. I said I'd, you know, installed some razor wire. I'd been paid to. I had no idea what the place was. I'd gone back there to have an open and frank discussion with the guy, and at that point it had been raided. So I was very open and honest about everything that had gone on. I handled my defence slightly differently. I remember I did have a barrister, and he said to me, you know, you want me to play it technically like these guys? And I said, no, not at all. I'm literally going to be as likeable as I possibly can be. I'm going to try and be kind of even slightly camp in the courtroom, because I didn't want to come across as kind of associated with a gang or anything like that. I just wanted to be likeable to the jury. So I just acted like myself. I was quite, I would wear like nice suits. I had little silk pink pochettes and stuff to make me look a bit smarter. I remember my missus ringing me up and saying, I've seen you all walking into court, and there was like two guys in front of me that looked like absolute beasts that just sort of glared at the BBC TV cameras, and then there was me behind like waving and looking super camp. Everything I did there was just presenting myself in a way that was affable, likeable, and trying to disassociate with this kind of gang element, because that was my main concern, that these people would immediately associate me and say, well, he looks like he's pretty hench, and these other guys are obviously up to no good, so we'll just bundle them all into the same thing. The last day of the trial came. It lasted like 2 weeks. You know, this trial was long. There was a lot of evidence given. A lot of the time the police, I must admit, got absolutely rinsed in the trial, because it became apparent that there was some corruption going on there. You know, there was some untoward stuff, and the judge was very unhappy with them. He actually shouted at a few of them. Some of them had collaborated together and kind of changed their written statements so that they all dovetailed with each other, which I've been told is completely incorrect. You know, that's pretty much tampering with the evidence. You shouldn't be changing what's in your pocketbooks so it matches what's in someone else's pocketbooks after the date. You know, they should be just referring to the original writings in there. So the judge went nuts about that. They also got lambasted for some bits of evidence they said they'd found, which it turned out for various different... I mean, they said they found a vacuum sealed bag full of cannabis that they'd found in this stove that was in this room upstairs, but actually that thing was fed with pure oxygen. Everything else had been burnt to an absolute white cinder. And how on earth you could have something on fire in there and a little vacuum seal baggie, and the bag had absolutely zero signs of being hot whatsoever. You know, normally a bag like that would at least crease up and melt. In that environment it would just be burnt to a cinder. And the fact that they had video of themselves magically pulling it out of the middle of this incinerator was kind of laughable, you know, and the judge pretty much told them that. Anyway, came to the end. I was absolutely shitting myself at the end of it because I had been told, you know, you could get a significant stretch of time for this. Conspiracies are difficult to prove, but they can actually attract quite a high sentence, because it isn't about the, you know, the substance itself. It's about the fact that it's like a RICO charge in the US. They're basically saying you're an organised group, you're a gang, you're getting together to make profits out of illegal activities, you've done all this premeditated, you've planned it, you know. So it's the whole pitch about being an organised gang, basically. That's the big thing with the conspiracy. And I was naturally worried about it. I was even more worried when the other two guys got found guilty. So they read them out. I was the third to be read out. They found the first two guys guilty, and I'm thinking, well, this is not looking good for me. I got a not guilty, thank God. I've got a clean criminal record. That was the only time I felt really close to possibly getting a criminal record. I was actually really concerned that day, and thank God I didn't. You know, I walked out of the court. A couple of the prosecution guys came over and thanked me and said, you know, you presented yourself really well. We actually didn't think there was much of a case against you in the first place. We were kind of surprised that you got dragged into this, which told me that there were powers higher than I knew about that had tried to drag as many people into this situation as they could. Basically just anyone with even a dubious link to the place was getting quite a lot of grief off the police at that time. People outside of this case were getting grief in a variety of other means by the authorities, you know, all sorts of pressure from other directions. I actually had some of that after the case. I went to open up a legitimate job and try and lease a building. I was going to start up a restaurant doing chicken wraps, like healthy gym wraps at the time. And it was a time we didn't really have any health food in the place, in the town I was in, but we had a couple of decent gyms. So I figured, hey, why not open something up in between both of them, and I could probably coin it in on all the people that wanted to eat like a protein-rich, healthy wrap. And that actually got soured because the landlord was approached by the police and told, yeah, don't lease him anything, you know, it's probably proceeds of crime that he's using. All kinds of dodgy aspersions. Guys, I hope that was of some interest for you. As I said, one of the most bizarre and extreme situations that I got involved in, and not one that I expected. If you've had experiences in a similar vein, let me know in the comments. Try and keep things clean. We're trying to run a legal and pleasant channel here. You know, I'm not pro drug use. This was just something that I got dragged into. Actually, I would rather that people weren't using drugs. The cannabis issue itself is slightly separate, I think. You know, half of the world has legalised that stuff. I think it's a bit of a shame the UK takes such a conservative line on it. It doesn't personally affect me. I don't want to smoke it. I don't use it. But I do know that lots of people do use it, and really, are they a big problem to society? No. They're probably eating a few too many chocolate cookies and maybe giggling slightly, but I don't really think that that's what we should be worrying about right now. You know, if we could tax that stuff and put those taxes to good use, then all the better, right? I don't have a big problem with that. I certainly don't think it's eroding the moral fabric of society, and if you look at other countries that have gone that way, everything seems to be going pretty well in those. Let me know your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed that. Guys, I'll catch you next time. Take care.